The apple fritter is its own weird thing. It's a donut, but not a donut. It's a crispy, craggy, appley monster. The way I judge a great donut shop is by its apple fritter. To me, it shows what kind of attention to detail we're dealing with from the very beginning. What we're looking for, a best case scenario, a truly great apple fritter, is a crispy, craggy outside, chunks of yeasty donut dough that are kind of smashed together with cinnamony apples. There's kind of like an aromatic darkness from that cinnamon. It's not too sweet, and there's a little bit of acid from the apples as well. It's a super balanced, incredibly interesting textural thing to enjoy. So the question for me is, can we make an apple fritter at home that's worth it? And I say definitely yes. I've been working on this fritter all week, and I'm really happy with the product I've gotten to. The good news is we don't need any special gear, but we are gonna be learning some new moves along the way. We're gonna be deep frying. I'm gonna walk you through it. It's not that scary, and it's definitely gonna be worth it. I'm stoked. Let's get started. The batch size for this recipe is 6 monster fritters. You're gonna need 275 grams or 1 3/4 cup all-purpose flour, 5 grams or 1 teaspoon of yeast, 70 grams or a half cup warmed milk, 1 egg, 5 grams or a half teaspoon salt, 35 grams or 2 teaspoons sugar, and 60 grams or 5 tablespoons of butter. Into our medium bowl, we're gonna add our flour, sugar, salt, and then yeast. To that, we're gonna add our butter. I'm breaking it up with my hands so it incorporates a little bit easier into our dough when I mix everything else. And then I'm adding warmed milk. I warm my milk to about 120 degrees because, let's be honest, your egg and your butter are probably coming right out of the refrigerator. Ideally, they would be tempered so that it doesn't slow down the yeast in our dough, but I don't do that. 0 out of 10 times do I do that. So I warm the milk to counteract that, warm up my dough a little bit so that it ferments a little bit faster. Using a spoon, stir to combine. Once the dough has become more cohesive, we're gonna flip out onto our table and we're gonna start to knead by hand. Using the palm of your hand, work the dough to build a little strength and further incorporate the mixture. We're gonna knead the dough by hand for 4 to 5 minutes or until the dough is well combined, the butter is no longer visible, and it has a nice shine to it. We're then gonna place it in a covered container and let it ferment for 2 hours in a nice warm place. While our dough is fermenting, it's time for us to sort out our apples. We're gonna need 250 grams or 2 to 3 apples, 2 teaspoons of cider vinegar, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, half lemon juice, 2 tablespoons sugar, and 3 tablespoons butter. Let's talk about fritter apples. Granny Smith, Honeycrisp, both work really well, but one thing I want to talk about is the cider vinegar and lemon juice. If you're using Granny Smiths, you don't need any additional acid. They're super tart. They're a great baking apple and they hold onto their texture really well once they're cooked, but they can be a little bit sharp for me. I like the Honeycrisp personally. Having done it multiple times with each apple, the Honeycrisp is what I prefer. You see me cutting Granny Smiths here and they totally work. I don't recommend using anything sweeter than a Honeycrisp. It's a pretty tart apple, but it does need a little bit of additional acid, and that's where the cider vinegar and lemon juice is gonna play. This is a crucial step on our path towards a perfect apple fritter. The apples need to be a treat to bite into. They need to have the right texture, that's why we're gonna par cook them, and they need to have acidity, hence the vinegar or the super tart Granny Smith. Once we're peeled, we're gonna cut slabs off the center and discard the core. We're then gonna medium dice our apples. Most of the wedges can be sliced in half and then into strips, and then we dice them. We're not putting these in any acid water or anything because they're going right into a saute pan. Speaking of that, heat up a large nonstick saute over high heat and then add in your 2 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna let that foam up and start browning. As soon as we're foaming, we're gonna add in our apples and get a hot saute on the outside. Once we're all coated in butter, we're gonna add in the sugar and cinnamon and continue to pan roast for about 90 seconds longer. We're looking to take the raw edge off the apples and to season them well. When we fry them, that's when they're gonna get nice and tender. Once your apples are looking like this and the sugar is getting a little bit brown, we're gonna deglaze with our apple cider vinegar if we're using it and a little bit of lemon juice. We're gonna cook on high for an additional 10 to 15 seconds just to reduce this liquid. The mixture should be sticky, browned, and taste really good. I've added a small pinch of salt here too, not listed in the previous ingredients list, but I do salt my apples in this situation because there's a noticeable difference. Something I've learned from my pastry chef bud, Sarah Osborne, is that you salt desserts. Most every component of every dish that she put on the menu at the restaurant we worked together had some sort of salt in it. In her setup, it was low key. Things did not taste salty. It's just kind of the pro level move for a pastry chef to make sure everything is as delicious as it can be. Once those are seasoned up, we're gonna set those aside to cool and we're gonna check on our dough. It's been 2 hours and there's some clear activity here. When we press in with our fingers, we can see some clear gas and indentation. Doughs that have butter and eggs in them like this don't usually grow like some of the more yeasted breads that we've worked with so far, so don't worry if it hasn't grown by double. That's not what we're looking for. So next we're gonna flip out our dough into a lightly floured work surface and hit with a little bit of flour. We're gonna grab our rolling pin and just start rolling it out. We're looking for about a 1/2 inch thick rectangle here. Once I've rolled it out, I like to flip the dough over and turn it 90 degrees to prevent sticking and to make sure I'm getting an even rollout. Repeat this until you've reached our desired rectangle size and grab your apple cinnamon mixture. Spread this stuff all over the dough. It doesn't have to be perfect and you'll see why in a second. Then we're gonna dust this with flour. This helps absorb some of the moisture and helps keep the fritter together when we go to fry. Wet apples are not the best glue for dough, so this flour is gonna be crucial in making sure that this thing stays together in the fryer. Once the apples are spread out, we're gonna roll this thing into sort of a cinnamon roll type situation. Make sure it's not stuck to the counter. At this point, it's where we really fritter this thing. Take a plastic dough scraper or a dull knife and cut this fritter on a bias at about 1 inch spacing all the way across. We're gonna repeat this cutting crossways on the other bias, running our card through one more time after for good measure to really chop this thing up. As you're scouring the internet to try and find info on how the best donut shop fritters are made, I stumbled upon this video from like the late 1990s of a solitary baker working in his shop describing to somebody else how to make apple fritters. This was the method he used. I was totally sold from the second I saw it. The fritters I made before I saw this video were not even close to perfect. I was still definitely figuring it out. So rest assured, this is the pro level bad boy donut shop guru move that's gonna put us in the end zone. After we've got it cut, we're gonna lightly flour the outside to keep this from sticking to our table. The move here is to really press this thing back together. After several attempts of this recipe, I can say that this part is very important. Do not be shy. Don't worry about degassing. Really press it together into a nice loaf. We need the apples and the dough to bond back together so that our fritter does not fall apart in the fryer. This is where the flour we put on the apples before will help us out a little bit. Once we have our apple loaf formed, grab your dough scraper and cut these into discs about 1 inch thick. We're then gonna stretch them and lightly flour them to be about a 1/2 inch thick. Anything thicker than this will have a hard time getting cooked all the way in the fryer. This recipe makes 6. I'm gonna take 4 of these to throw in the fryer and then I'm gonna bake off 2. I kinda wanna show you guys what these look like in the oven so you can make up your mind whether or not you wanna fry. These are gonna get covered with another sheet tray and set aside to gently proof while we heat our oil for 20 minutes total. Okay, so let's talk deep frying. This is not a zero risk situation, I am not gonna lie, but it's also not that dangerous. We just have to pay attention and we also have to make sure that we have all the tools we need ready to go. We're dealing with something that holds heat extremely well and it is 2 times the temperature of boiling water. So if you have any kids underfoot, lock them in another room, put on some Rugrats, and pay attention. Let's talk fry oil real quick as well. I'm using coconut oil and avocado oil. You want it to be about 3 inches deep in your pot. You can use whatever you've got that isn't olive oil. To do this frying safely, we're gonna make sure we have all of our stuff ready to go before we drop our first fritter. That means a slotted spoon, our thermometer, a wire rack and a sheet tray to put our hot fritters on. We're gonna make sure our oil is 360 degrees and then we're gently gonna lay down our fritters one at a time. Again, we need about 3 inches total in our fryer or about 1 quart or 4 cups. We're gonna fry these for about 2 minutes per side. I'm gonna flip them gently using my slotted spoon. We don't wanna be rough on them, they could fall apart. And honestly, don't sweat that too much because they're almost better if they're small. I don't know, maybe make baby fritters next time you're feeling a little crazy and you need that next thrill. Okay, so it's been 2 more minutes, that's 4 minutes total, and we have our fried apple fritter. Now we're gonna glaze. Earlier I mixed up a batch of simple glaze that's 1 cup powdered sugar, a 1/2 teaspoon vanilla extract, a 1/2 teaspoon salt, and about 3 to 4 tablespoons of milk. We're gonna whisk that to combine and then set it aside for later use. I've glazed these hot and cooled, and I think they're crispier if you let the donut cool all the way, then glaze. If you want something a little bit sweeter and a little bit more saturated with glaze, go for it warm. I personally like my fritters crispy as possible, so let these cool for about 15 minutes before glazing. The glaze should be fairly thick as well. It's a matter of personal taste here. You can add more sugar if you like a thicker glaze. You can add more milk if you like it thinner. Some people like it almost like frosting. I'm somewhere in the middle, as you can see here. It's kind of between saucy and spreadable. Either way, we definitely want to make sure we get a liberal amount on the top of the fritter to have a nice heavy glaze, just like you see here. We're gonna let that glaze set up and we're gonna brew ourselves a nice pot of super dark coffee. The type your grandpa still drinks, like Folgers or Maxwell House. Super dark roast coffee. Once you got that, it's time for us to bite this fritter. Lauren, if I eat this, that'll be 2 full ones. Craggy, crispy. So the acidity of the apples is absolutely perfect. I haven't eaten this much sugar in like 6 months. I'm gonna be in a weird spot after I eat this second one. Okay, I'm done. A proper handmade yeast fermented apple fritter is among the best things a human can put in their mouth, period. If you're willing to embrace the dark arts of deep frying at home, it can be yours. I encourage you to give it a try. As always, guys, if you got value out of this content, please hit subscribe, tell a friend. The recipe is gonna be listed down below, and we'll see you next time.